Hello. Hello. Được không? Phải một rồi. Sắp kết thúc. Không nói nhiều nữa, chúng ta bắt đầu luôn. Holy shit. Giờ lúc mà học được ta tách
In this video, we're going to look at this flood gauge. Very cool. We can start it, we can stop it, we can increment it by a few. When we do, we can get the correct position it's at, 67. And this is something new and different that just comes with ttkbootstrap. Obviously, there's no flood gauge in regular Tkinter, so this is kind of comes do. We can. In this video, we're going to look at this flood gauge. Very cool. We can start it, we can stop it, we can increment it by a few. When we do, we can get the correct position it's at, 67. And this is something new and different that just comes with ttkbootstrap. Obviously, there's no flood gauge in regular Tkinter, so this is kind of exciting and really fun. So we're going to dive into that in this video. So I've got a file here. I'm just calling it flood.py. It's our basic ttkbootstrap starter code that we always have. We imported ttkbootstrap as TB. You got to pip install that if you haven't already. We've set the window theme to superhero, and pretty much everything else is normal Tkinter. So let's come down here and create a flood gauge. I'm just going to call this my gauge. Call it anything you want. And that's going to be a tb.flood gauge. And it's TB dot because we've imported ttkbootstrap as TB up here, so TB goes there. And we want to put this in root, and we want to give it a boot style. And you're going to use any of your bootstrap color styles. I'm going to pick success. That's green, I believe. You could pick primary, secondary, danger, info, light, dark, all the regular colors that you have to choose from. Now, we can also set the font for this. So I'm going to make the font a little bigger just so it's easier for us to see. I'm going to set that as Helvetica and give it like a size 18. Now, here's where it gets a little bit different. So right off the bat, I want to give this a mask of POS, short for position, right? Now, we can keep track of the exact position of our flood gauge by passing in, just like if it was an F string, you know, you kind of do an F string like that. It's not an F string, but we put then a percentage sign after it. This will automatically update with the current position as it moves up and down, right? So you don't have to do that, but if you want it to sort of keep track of what it's doing on the flood gauge itself, that's very, very useful. So we could do all kinds of different things. We can set the maximum, for instance. So, you know, you might want this to be 100, or you might want it to be 50, or, you know, whatever you want. I'm just going to put it at 80 for now, just for fun. We'll play around with this. And then you could also set the orient. And by default, this is going to be horizontal. There you go. So if you're going to do horizontal, which is left to right, you don't have to put your orient in there. You could just leave that out. But if you want to do it up and down, then it would be vertical. And we'll play around with this and change it up in a bit. So finally, we can set the value that we want to start on. So you might want to start it at 0. Obviously, you could just leave this one off if that's the case. But if you want to start it at a certain level, you could put it right there. So now let's my_gauge.pack this guy. And let's give this a pad Y of like 50. There you go. So let's go ahead and save this, head back over to our code and run this guy. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run python flood.py. And when we do, we see POS position of 10%. It's sort of 10% up. And there we go. So, okay, that's cool. Now this is kind of small. We can make it a lot bigger if we want. And we do that by playing with the pack value. So we could go fill equals X. That's X left and right. I suppose we should capitalize it, but I'm not sure that matters. So, okay, let's save this and run it. And now you're going to see this is massively all the way, it fills all the way left to right. So, okay, that's, you know, kind of not great. So we can also give this a pad X of like, I don't know, 20 to give it padding on each side. Make it a little bit nicer to look at, I suppose. Okay, so there we go. So I kind of like that. We'll just leave it like that. So All right, now let's create a button that we could start it and stop it and add some incrementation. And also I'm gonna change this from 10% back down to 0 because I don't know, I don't really need to start it at 10%. So there you go. So let's create a start underscore button, and that's gonna be a tb.button. We wanna put it in root. We want the text to say start, and let's give this a boot style of like danger and outline. So it'd be like red outlined. And let's give this a command of starter. And we haven't created that yet, but we will in a second. So let's start underscore button dot pack and give this a pad y of like 20 to push down the screen a little bit. Now I'm just gonna copy this a couple of times. And this one we'll call a stop button. And we'll have the text say stop. And we'll give it a command of stopper. I don't know. And then this one will be, we'll call this inc for increment, INC. And this will be increment. And here, let's call this inker. I don't know. Or incrementer. There we go. So now we want to create these three functions, starter, stopper, and incrementer. So let's come up here and let's define starter. And we want to pass, and let's define stopper, and we want to pass, and let's define incrementer, and we want to pass. So, okay, to start, it's very easy. So let's start the gauge. We just call my underscore gauge dot start. That's it. Now to stop it, same thing. We call my underscore gauge dot stop. Very complicated. And to increment it, we just call my underscore gauge dot step. And then we say, what steps do we want? So I want it to go every 10, right? So when we click the button, it bops up 10 and then it stops. So we can go ahead and save this and let's run this. And that should work out okay. Let's see what we got. So here we have start, stop, and increment. So let's start, and you can see it just one at a time. It goes like that. We could stop it by stopping, and now we can increment. So 52, 62, 72. And then once it gets to the top, it just starts on over again, right? So that's kind of cool. And there we go. Now, one thing I'll mention is how it comes to the end and then it starts over at 0. That's because of the mode. So you can change that if you want when you define the flood gauge. So here we can set the mode to, and the default is determinate. Right? That means keep on going, basically. But we can change it to indeterminate if we want. If we save this and run it, you'll see this sort of ping pongs back and forth from start to finish. So we go start, and you can see, one, it looks different. The gauge itself is not full, but when it hits the end, boom, it bops back down, and it keeps going, and it keeps counting. So we're at now 180, 100, 200, 240, and it's going up to 80, which is what we set our value, our max value at. So this is kind of weird. You may want that for some reason. Same thing works with increment. It will bop back and forth as you increment it. So just sort of keep that in mind. I'm going to change it back to determinate because indeterminate is just, freaking me out. So let's go down here and let's create a label now. So my label, this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in root, and we want the text to say, I don't know, position, something like that. And now let's my underscore label dot pack, give this a pad y of 20, push it down screen a little bit. So with this label, we want to update it every time we hit the increment button to show us exactly what position we have. And you can use this to get the position of anything, even when it's in starting and stopping. But we're just going to do the increment one because that's the easiest. So we can come up here and go my underscore label dot config and set the text equal to, and I'm going to create an F string and go position, and then pass in, this is going to be my underscore gauge dot variable dot get. So that will get the current position. That's that variable. And this gets created automatically with the widget, and it keeps track of that automatically. So you can at any time see where your position is in your flood gauge by calling the name of your gauge dot variable and then dot get, sort of like an entry box, dot get it, right? So let's go back over here, try this guy again. We're at position 0, let's increment at 1, and it says boom 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. And when it hits 80, boom, it starts over at 0. And again, we can start and stop here. And now it's 34%. If we click it again, boom, 44%. So any position it currently is at, it will keep track of that. So very cool and very interesting. Now, just to make sure here, we can come back over here and make sure that this is a number. It's supposed to be a floating point number, but let's see if we can add 10 to it just to make sure. So if we increment it, boom, now it goes to 20 because it's 10 plus 10, right? So 30, 40, and we're good to go. So it's definitely a number. You could do numbery things with it. You don't have to convert it from a string like sometimes you have to do with things, and that's very cool. So I'm gonna get rid of that. So that's the plug gauge. Pretty cool, fun little widget, and I'm really happy to see these little extra things popping up in ttkbootstrap, and it makes it a lot of fun to use and all kinds of cool things you could do with this, and that's all there is to it.
Ủa, xong rồi hả? Không cần thiết lắm, thế thôi. Hold on.
In this video, we're going to look at this calendar widget for ttkbootstrap, and technically it's called the date entry widget. And I'm going to show you how to use it, how to get information from it, some interesting things you can do with it, and it should be a lot of fun. All right, so I've got a file. I'm just calling it dater.py, and it's our basic ttkbootstrap starter code that we always have. So we're importing ttkbootstrap as TB, not as TTK, but as TB, because that's the way I like to do it. And pretty much everything is the same as regular Tkinter. Let's come down here and create a date entry widget. So I'm going to call this my date, and this is going to be a tb.dateEntry widget. We want to put it in root. And just like everything else in ttkbootstrap, you can give this a boot style and pick any color you want. So, you know, primary, secondary, danger, info, light, dark, all of the basic colors that come with ttkbootstrap. If you're not familiar with those colors, check the previous videos in the series and learn all about that. So I'm just going to do danger. Let's do red. All right. And for now, let's just leave it at that. So let's go my_date.pack and give this a pad Y of like 50 to really push it down the screen. So if we save this and run it, head over to our tkinter.com directory and run python dater.py, we get this widget, and it's red because we set the boot style to danger, and we click on it, it's got red here, and we can click on a certain thing, and when we do, it updates in this box here. So if we click on the 13th, it updates to the 13th. And that's cool. So one thing to keep in mind is this is basically an entry box. So when we want to get whatever's in here, we have to get the entry box for this widget. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But this is basically it. So this is cool. And we can play around with different settings in this, you know, what the default start date is and things like that. So let's go ahead and look at that. But first, let's say somebody clicks on February 14th. Now it says 2/14/23 here. How do we programmatically get that and do something with it in our program, right? Well, super easy. Let's come back over to our code, and I'm going to create a button. I'm going to call this my_button, and it's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in a root. We want the text to say get date, something like that. We can give this a boot style of, let's say, danger and outline. So it's red but outlined. And let's give this a command of, I don't know, 80. I don't know, something like that, whatever. So we don't have this function. We'll go ahead and create it. But first, let's my_button.pack this guy. Give this pad Y of 20, push down the screen a little bit. Finally, let's create a label. So my_label, and this is going to be a tb.label. We want to put it in a root. We want the text to be nothing for now. And let's my_label.pack this guy and give it a pad Y of 20 to push down the screen. Now, maybe we do want to put something here. So let's say you picked something, right? So, okay, we've got these things. Now let's come up here and create that function. So we want to define datey, right? So let's say we want to grab whatever the person selected as the date and update this label with that information. How do we do that? Well, we can grab the date. And to do that, let's go my_label.config. And let's set the text equal to, now I'm going to create an F string. I'm going to say you picked, and then we want to pass in something into this label. And what do we want to pass in? Well, remember we called our calendar my date, so that would be mydate.entry.get. And this is just the .get that you would use for any entry box in Tkinter, right? So we're just getting whatever's in there. So let's go ahead and save this and run it, make sure that worked. And back over here, run this guy. So let's say we select again 14th, Valentine's Day. It's my birthday coming up. All right, we click get date and it says you picked 2/14/2023. Now, what exactly is this returning? Is this returning a date time object? What? Well, actually, this is just returning a string. So you can't do date time stuff to it unless you convert it into a date time object, which you can do that if you want. But just keep in mind, this is not an integer, it's not a float, it's just a string of text, right? So, okay, that's cool. Now let's configure this thing a little bit. So by default, it just opens up to whatever date the day is. So today is the 31st of January. So if we, run this guy again, we can see it just says 1/31/23. That's just today's date. So if you want to set a specific date, either when it opens or programmatically or whatever, you could do that. And to do that, let's head back over to our code. And when you define your widget right here, we can set the start date. We can set that equal to something. Now, this is actually a date time object. This is not a string. So in order to use date time stuff, we need to import date from Python. So let's come up here and go from date time. We want to import date. So now we can create date objects and we can use them. So here we just want to call the date function, create a little date object thing. And here we can set the date to whatever we want. Now the format is going to be year. So 2023, let's say we want the month of 2, which is February, and we want the day of 14. So if we save this and run it, we see by default now it shows up as 2/14/23. If we click this, 2/14/23 is selected. Now, of course, we can still change it to say the 9th. If we click the date, it says, hey, you picked the 9th. So that's cool. So one other thing I want to point out, look at this. It starts on Sunday, right? Sunday is the first one listed in this very first column. And it goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We can change that. We can change the default start date. So maybe your calendar, you want it to start on Monday, right? That's not unusual. So how do we get Monday to be the first column? Well, Sunday is technically the 6th day of the week in Python. So it starts at Monday is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, Saturday is 5, Sunday is 6. So we could change what's called the first week day, change that first column. So just up here in our code here where we define our widget, I'm just going to set the first week day to 0. So remember, Monday is 0. It's sort of like a Python list, right? They start at 0. And so in the world of Python, Monday is 0, or at least for this widget, right? So if we want Monday, that's 0. By default, this is going to be 6, which is Sunday, but we want Monday, so just change it to 0. If we save this, head back over here and run it. And we click this. Now we see Monday is the first column listed and Sunday's way over here. So, okay, that's cool. Nice that you can change that very quickly and automatically. All right, so that's basically pretty much all you can do with this, which is very cool already. But let's say you want to, instead of having a thing pop up like this when you click on it, maybe you want a button that you can say, hey, pick the date, and you don't want this whole thing on the screen, but you still want the functionality of this thing. How do you do that? Well, we can do that too. Let's head back over to our code. So up here at the top, we can from ttkbootstrap.dialogs. So this is basically a dialog box. We want to import query box, right? So if we save this, now let's come down here and let's create a second button. Let's call this my_button. No, actually, let's just copy all of this because that's going to be easier. So let's change this to my button 2. And here, let's say get calendar, maybe. And instead of danger, let's call this, I don't know, success. Just change the color a little bit. And let's just change the command to thing because I'm being lazy. So now we can come up here and let's define thing. And let's just set some variable. I'm going to call it thing or cal. Let's call it cal, short for calendar. And we could set that equal to just a query box, right? Which is what we imported right here. So now let's update our label. Let's go, actually, let's just grab this and pop this out. Instead of mydate.entry.get, this is going to be cal.get_date. Because up here, we're getting that entry box because this whole date entry widget has sort of been created for ttkbootstrap, but underlyingly, it uses the date entry ttk widget, right? And that thing, to use it and grab a date, uses this get date function, right? So We're going to be using that for this query box. So we would call get date, right? So, okay, that works. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. See what this does. So here we've got this get calendar. When we click it, boom, up pops our own brand new, independent of this thing over here, date entry calendar thing. And you'll notice the color is primary. I'm sure you could mess around with this to change the color. I didn't even try, but you would probably want to do that, or just understand that it's going to be primary, one of the two. So now I'm going to click on January 12th. When I click on that, boom, it updates to 1/12/23. And so we get the date there. We can change it again to the 20th. Boom, it updates to the 20th. Now we can still use this guy up here, and February 10th. Click get the date, boom, February 10th. So, whichever of these two methods you want to use, if your program is more suited to have this thing right here pop up on the screen and, just always be present, then use this, right? Totally fine. If you don't want this whole thing up on the screen all the time and you just want to call a calendar whenever you want to call a calendar, then use this second method. Get calendar, boom, up it pops, do your thing, and you're good to go. So that's the date entry widget for TTK Bootstrap. Very cool, super useful, very, very nice looking. I mean, this thing looks great, super useful, super functional, and pretty easy to use.
Hay đấy, nhưng mà không có ứng dụng.
In this video, we're going to look at frames and labels with TTK Bootstrap. Now, this may sound a little boring, but there's a couple cool things here that you're going to want to know about. So it should be pretty cool. So I've got a file. I'm just calling it framer.py. It's our basic TTK Bootstrap starter code that we've always got. Got the theme name set to superhero. And let's come down here and create a frame. So I'm going to call this my_frame. And this is going to be a tb.frame because we're importing TTK Bootstrap as tb. And we just want to put this in root. Now we can give this a boot style equal to all of the other boot style options we've looked at. So you can change the color to danger, primary, secondary, info, success, light, dark, all those things. So I'm just going to start out with light. See how that goes. So let's go my_frame.pack. Give this a pad Y of like 40 or so, really push it down the screen. So, okay, we've got this thing, but there's nothing in it. So let's just put some stuff in it. So let's build a quick entry form. So I'm going to call this my entry, and this is going to be a tb.entry. And we want to put this in my frame. So to put things in frames, you just reference them like that. And let's give this a font of Helvetica and size 18, just to make it bigger so that it expands our frame a little bit. And let's go my_entry.pack, give this a pad Y of like 20 and a pad X of 20 to push it down the screen inside the frame. Okay, so let's also create a quick button. So let's go my_button, and this is gonna be a tb.button. We wanna put it in my frame as well. Want the text to say, hey, click me. Color. Second. So let's go my_button.pack. I'm going to come up here. We'll just pass. Okay, last but not least, let's create a label. In root, let's put it out. And then got this frame. Let's just save this and pack this guy and give him a pad Y of 20. So let's just save this and see what we've got so far. So head over to your terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's just run Python framer.py. And when we do, we've got this frame. It's a light colored frame. We've got a button that doesn't do anything. We've got an entry box that doesn't do anything. And we've got a label that just has the default text, which is, in this theme, light colored. So, okay, that's pretty much what we would expect. Now we can change the color of the label. We already know how to do that. We just come down here and let's give it a boot style of anything we want. We can say success if we want. Make it horribly green and ugly. Save that, run it. And we've got now green. That's the success color, right? So, okay, that's cool. But we can also do something else with these labels. We can invert them. So that's really kind of cool. So let's come back over here. So we could just give this a boot style of inverse. So inverse. So all right, let's go ahead and save that. See how this looks. And now it's inverted. It's got like a little background around it, right? So that's kind of cool, right? So it looks ugly like that, but in this instance, to make it look cooler, I would probably give this a light theme, like that. Save that and run it. And now it kind of matches that. It's kind of cool. So this gives you a lot of flexibility to make your app look a certain way if you need it to. And very cool. Now we can also change the color of the frame if we want, which, probably would want to do that. So instead of light, let's make it dark, whatever. Save it, run it. And you can see now it's dark. That's kind of cool, right? Button kind of disappears, so you would probably want to change the color of your button, change the boot style there. Now you can use all of the boot style colors for both of these, labels and frames, like I said. So, info, success, danger, primary, secondary. What are the other ones? Light, dark. There's a couple more. You can check the prior videos in this series to check those out if you're not familiar with them yet. But very cool. Now, one thing I want to mention, a lot of themes have background colors. So you may not be able to match the theme color to the frame. And there are times when you just want a frame to be invisible and you want to be able to do stuff in that frame. For instance, like if we're packing everything on the screen, but we need to grid certain things, I would put them in a frame because then you can grid in a frame, right? We've done this lots of different times. So if that was the case, you just wanted to make it invisible, what you could do is head over to your code and instead of making this a TB frame, just make it a regular bootstrap frame, right? So then you just have to get rid of the boot style because regular Tkinter frames don't have a boot style. So I'll just comment that out. If we save this, head back over to our terminal and run this. Now we've got the frame, but it's invisible. And we could do things like grid inside of it or whatever you want. So keep in mind, even if you may be using the ttkbootstrap library, you can still use the stuff from old Tkinter if you want, or TTK if you want to. You just have to import it like normal. So very cool. Those are frames and those are labels. That's pretty much all there is to frames and labels. It's not that exciting, I get it, but very useful, something you're going to use in every app that you ever make. So thought I'd talk about it. In this video, we're going to look at the menu button, and these are the menu buttons. So
mình coi nhìn thêm một nửa cái hướng dẫn này đi thì mình thấy một điều rằng cái này xấu quá đi, thua cỡ UI nhiều quá xấu. Và đánh giá cái giao diện như này 2 điểm.
We've got, I've got this danger colored one, and we can change the color. I click primary, it changes the primary, secondary, danger, info. We can do outlines. That looks pretty cool. Outline secondary, outline danger. And you can see the little text updates every time I click something. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got some starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it menu_button.py. And we're using the superhero theme for ttkbootstrap. We've imported the library right there. And here we go. So how do we build these things? Well, they're a little complicated, but not too bad. So I'm just going to create a variable. I'm going to call it my_menu. And this is going to be a tb.menu button. And it's TB because I've imported ttkbootstrap as TB. And we want to put this guy in root. Let's give it a boot style of like warning. I think that's orange maybe. I don't know, whatever. And then let's give it some text and let's just have it say things. I don't know. This is the text that's going to appear before you click on anything. So before it's opened or clicked on, that's the text that'll show up. So things, right? Whatever. So then let's my_menu dot pack, and let's give this a pad Y of like 20 to really push it down the screen. So let's save this and run it just to see if that worked. Should have. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run Python menu_button. And when we do, we get things. When we click on it, nothing happens because we haven't told it to do anything yet. So, okay, that looks good. Head back over here, and I'm gonna push this down a little bit, give it a 50 instead of a 20. Okay, so we've got this guy, but now there's nothing inside of it. Now to put things inside of our menu button, we need to create basically a little menu inside of our menu button. So let's create basic menu. And call this anything you want, but I'm going to call it inside_menu because, if we called it menu, is it the menu button? Is it the menu? It's complicated. So I'm just going to call it inside menu because it's inside of our menu button, but, call it anything you want. So this is going to be a tb.menu, and then we need to pass in my_menu, which is just what we named our menu button up here, right? This whole thing. So, okay, that looks good. Now we can add items to our inside menu, right? So first, these are supposed to have variables assigned to them. I don't use the variable because I just find you don't need to. We have to add a label. We can use the label as the variable. But if you need to use a variable, you call this anything you want. I'm going to call it item_variable because, it's an item we're adding to the menu. And then we just give this a string var, right? This is just a Tkinter string var variable. thing, right? You're probably familiar with those. So now we need to create a list of items that we want to put in our menu and then sort of loop through that list and add them to our menu. So let's do that with a for loop. So let's go for X, call it anything you want, in, and now let's just create our Python list of things we want. So I want to put different colors in there, different boot styles. So when we click on it, we can change it. So we'll start out with adding primary. We can do secondary like that. We can do danger, that's the red color. We can do info. You can also change these to be outlined instead of solid. So let's go outline primary and outline secondary. I'll just do a few of these because it's pretty boring. So outline, say danger maybe. And outline info. That's good enough. So we need a colon at the end of this because we're looping, right? This is a for loop. There we go. Now, what are we doing as we loop? Well, we're adding things to our inside underscore menu. And what are we doing? We're adding actually a radio button. You can add a check button, but that gets a little goofy. We want a radio button because we only want to select one thing at a time. So, all right, add radio button. And then we're giving them a label of X, which is what each of these are, right? And now if you want to give the variable, you can add the variable of our item underscore var. I never really use that, but if you wanted to, you could, and that would be how you do it. So, okay, that looks good. So the last step, we need to sort of associate the menu with the menu button. So let's associate the inside menu with the menu button. So to do that, we just call my underscore menu, which is the name of our, menu button. And then inside of here, we're going to assign the menu to it. And what menu are we going to assign? We're going to inside our inside underscore menu. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and run it. See if that worked. We ran through that pretty quickly. So Python menu button.py. And now when we click on this, boom, we see each of these things. Very cool. But when we click on them, nothing happens. So how do we get it? Well, it does put a little checkbox next to it. So that's fun. So how do we get it to where, when we click on a thing, it does something? Well, that's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. Now, normally we would come over here and we would assign a command equals something. So let's come up here and create a command called stuff, right? And what do we want to do? Well, we want to take whatever X that we clicked on and pass it into here as an X, and we want to do something with it, right? Well, normally you would call stuff, but we also want to pass in that X, right? Well, whenever you want to pass things in to a function from a button, which is essentially what this is, in Tkinter, you can't just do that. You need to create a lambda. So if we create a lambda, Lambda, and now I know this looks like a capital L, but it's actually a lowercase, you would think that this would work, but it doesn't, and I'll show you why. So let's come up here and let's just print X. Or better yet, let's come down here and create a label real quick. So I'm just going to call this my underscore label. This is going to be a tb.label. We want to put a little dot pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 40 to really push down the screen. But now let's come up here and let's configure our label. So my underscore label dot config, and we want to set the text equal to X for now, right? So let's run this and see what happens. This is not going to actually work. So here, when we click on primary, boom, it's outline info, which is the last thing. If we click on secondary, boom, it's outline info, which is the last thing. Why? Well, think about it. As this thing is looping, it adds X into our function up here. Well, it does it for primary. Primary gets passed in. Then it does it for secondary. Secondary gets passed in. Danger, info, outline, outline, until it comes to the very last thing, outline info. It passes it into the function, and then boom, X becomes outline info. Now, we don't want that. It's overriding all the older ones that went in. So how do we change that? Well, super easy. We just come up here and let's inside of here say X equals X. That's all we have to do. That should fix this. So here, I'm gonna make a little F string and I'm gonna say you selected X. Okay, so let's save this and run it and see if that works. It should. So now when we click this thing, when I click primary, boom, it says you selected primary. When I click info, it says boom, you selected info.
Wow.
When I select outline danger, boom, you selected outline danger. Now this doesn't update yet, we have to change that, but at least we're passing the right thing. And this is why I don't use a variable with this. Why do we need a Tkinter variable? We've got the label. We can do things based on that label if we want. We could do any logic we want. So that's just my rant. Finally, we want to change our my_menu. We want to .config it. We want to set the boot style to X. So that will change the actual color, because when we defined our menu button, we set the boot style to warning. So here we can update that boot style with whatever we clicked on in the button, in the drop down. And so that should be fun. So let's run this guy one more time, see if all this worked. So now we click primary, boom, it changes to blue primary. Secondary, danger, info. We got the outlines. I like the outlines the best. I think those are pretty good. So outline primary, outline secondary, outline danger, like that one, and outline info. So that's it. That's menu button. Now you can play around with the size of the text and the colors of the background and the foreground and all that using a regular style widget. And I've got videos on style widgets earlier in the playlist. I think the button video we did, we also talked about style. So you can watch that if you want to change the backgrounds of these things. But yeah, pretty cool and pretty easy. So that's menu button with ttkbootstrap, and that's all there is to it.
Ta cái này dừng học cái đi thôi. Thành học đốt nè, đi xong sọ nó khác bắt giờ. Thấy cái này như nào?
It's the text. I've got TK. In this video, we're going to look at the meter widget in ttkbootstrap. This thing is awesome and very customizable. We could do all kinds of stuff with this. You can see I've got these sort of dot increment percent. Look at in this that we always have. The rest is important. You can play, drag it and drop it. In this video, we're going to be looking at notebook tabs with ttkbootstrap. And this is what we're doing here. We've got these little tabs here, and on each one we can have different stuff and we can style them different ways and all that good stuff. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So we've got our basic starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it mb.py, and we're importing ttkbootstrap with pip, and it's tb here because we're importing ttkbootstrap as tb. And we just want to put this in our root window, and let's give this a boot style of, and I'm going to give this a boot style of dark. Now you can use all your boot style colors for this: primary, secondary, info, success, danger, dark light, and all of that. So keep that in mind. And that's really all we need to do. Now let's my_notebook.pack this guy, and I'm gonna give this a pad Y of like 20 to kind of push it down the screen a little bit. So the trick to this thing is you add frames as the tabs, right? So you create a frame, you put whatever you want in that frame, and then you add that frame to the notebook. So let's create a frame. I'm gonna call it tab 1, right? And this is gonna be a tb.frame. You can also use a regular Tkinter frame, but it's gonna be Tkinter colored. So we wanna use tb.frame, and we wanna put this in my_notebook. So I'm gonna copy this, and let's create a second one, and I'm gonna call it tab 2. So we've got these two frames, now we just need to put stuff in them. So let's just play around with this. I'm gonna create a label, and this is gonna be a label. We wanna put it in tab 1, right? So the text is gonna say, my awesome label, right? It's a very awesome label. And you know, just for fun, let's give this a font of, and let's say Helvetica, and like a size of 18 to make it nice and big. And then we could just my_label.pack this guy. And let's give this a pad Y of like 20, push down screen inside the frame a little bit. And then we can play around with this. Let's create a text box. I don't know, this is gonna be my text, and it's gonna equal a regular text box. Now notice this is not a ttkbootstrap text box, just a regular text box, that's fine. We can put it in tab 1 as well. And I don't know, let's give it a width of like 70 and a height of like 10, just to sort of expand it a little. And again, we can my_text.pack this guy. And I'm gonna give it a pad Y of like 10, maybe a pad X of 10 too, just for fun. Mix it up. And finally, let's create a button, just one little button. And this is gonna be a tb.button. We want to put it in tab 1 again, and we want the text to say, click me, or something like that. And let's give this a boot style of like danger and outline. So it'll be red outlined. Okay. And then finally, let's my underscore button dot pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 20 to push it down the screen a little bit. So we've got our first tab, our first frame filled out. Now let's create our second one. And I'm not gonna be as elaborate with the second one. Let's just create a label. In fact, I'm just gonna come up here and copy this guy. And instead of calling it my label, let's call it my label 1, or probably my label 2 would make more sense. And then this is gonna say, this is tab 2, woo, right? Capitalize that. And instead of putting it in tab 1 right here, let's put it in tab 2. So, okay, that looks good. Now let's add our frames to the notebook. Now we haven't added them yet. So we've got this tab 1 and tab 2. And to add them, we call my underscore notebook dot add. And then we just say, hey, tab 1. And we want to give this some text. So I'm just going to say tab 1. Let me copy this guy, paste it again, call tab 2. And on this one, we're going to call tab 2. Right? And that's it. So this text is the little text that's going to be on the little tab at the top of our notebook, the little panel thing. So there we go. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run python nb.py, and boom, here we go. So we've got tab 1 and tab 2. Inside of tab 1, we've got our label, we've got our text field, we've got our button that doesn't actually do anything, but it looks good. In tab 2, we have just some text that says this is tab 2. Now, I've got this set to the dark theme for this notebook, and this looks pretty good, right? So when you click a tab, it highlights. Otherwise, it's sort of muted and dark. I like that, but you can use all of your boot styles. So if we come up here to where we define this thing, instead of dark, if we want to say info, for instance, I don't really like the boot style colors with this, and you'll see why here. See, here it is. Now it looks like tab 2 is highlighted. Like we've selected tab 2, but we haven't. It's the one that hasn't been selected yet, but it's the one with color. So that doesn't really make sense. When we click on it, we're now on tab 2. It says this is tab 2, but tab 1 is the one that sort of looks like it's highlighted. So it's very confusing. And it's not just this boot style, it's any of them that you pick. So if we change this to danger, for instance, we're gonna get the same sort of weird thing going on. The non-tabbed tab is the one that's highlighted, which is kind of weird. So I sort of keep that in mind. I get around that myself by just using, dark or light. It's still going to get the same thing with light if we see here. Let's look at this, but it's not quite as bad, right? We click on this. It still, in my mind, isn't great. Now, you might be thinking, what if we call like danger outline? What happens there? Well, we get in there. So you can't do that. It would be kind of fun if you did, if you could, but no. So I'll keep this at dark. Go ahead and save this. We'll take one more look at this. I think that looks pretty good. And very neat. In this video, we're going to look at progress bars, and they're very similar to the floodgate we looked at a few videos ago. And you can see we've got this progress bar. I've got it set to striped. You could also set it to solid, and we've got it sort of the green color. And we can increment a few things at a time. We can stop. We can do auto every second. Boom, boom. I've got it moving 20. And that's kind of cool. We can just go automatically zoop like that. It keeps going and going. All kinds of cool things you can do with this. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So I've got some basic starter code. I'm calling it pb.py, short for progress bar. I come down. We'll just sort of start walking through all of them here. We want to put this. Very cool. In this video, we're going to look at radio buttons for ttkbootstrap. Now we're going to look at the actual buttons, these round things. We're also going to look at radio buttons, like the actual buttons here. So you can click and it'll go from one to the other. They act in the same way as radio buttons, but they look like actual buttons. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Oh, I guess radio button, whatever. We're importing ttkbootstrap as TB. I've pip installed that already. And we're using the superhero theme. So let's come down here. There's a few different ways to make radio buttons, and I'll show you a couple different ways in this video. But I like to create a Python list that'll have all the things that I want to make buttons for, and we just loop through that and create buttons for each one. But I'll show you a more manual way to do it also later on in this video. So let's create radio toppings or something. So let's go pepperoni, and we'll just do a few of these. We also want cheese pizza, and we also want, what, veggie pizza, something like that. So it's just a basic Python list, nothing really interesting to see here. But now we also need to create a Tkinter variable, keep track of everything. So we want to know when you click on a button, which button you've clicked on. So we need a Tkinter variable for that. And Tkinter has these special variables. You can have string vars or int vars. We're gonna use a string var for this. So I'm gonna call this my underscore topping. And we're gonna set this equal to a string var, just like that. And that's all there is to it. So now let's loop through the list and create radio buttons. So let's go for topping in toppings, right? So remember, toppings is our Python list. We're gonna loop through it for each topping in there. What do we wanna do? Well, let's create a tb.radio button. And notice the B in button is lowercase. I have a tendency to wanna make it uppercase, but it's lowercase. And we wanna put this in root, and now we have to pick a boot style. And just like everything in ttkbootstrap, you can use all your basic boot styles. So primary, secondary, info, danger, dark light, all the things. So let's do danger. So danger is red, so we'll create red ones. And then now we need to set a variable. Well, we know what our variable is. We've defined it right here as my topping. So pop that in there. Now we also want to designate the text. What is going to say on the actual radio button itself? What text should it be? Well, I think it should be topping, right? So for pepperoni, it'll say pepperoni. For cheese, it'll say cheese. For veggie, it'll say veggie. Now, like I said, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can use a list of tuples and then, have a different 2, veggie, and 3. So you might put the name here and the variable there. Like I said, there's lots of different ways to do radio buttons. They all work with Bootstrap. So we're going to do it this way. And we also need to set the value. The value will also be topping. So whenever somebody clicks on it, what do we put in this variable? Well, we put whatever that topping is, right? So my topping, the variable, will become pepperoni. My topping, the variable, will become cheese, etc. So, okay, that looks good. Now, we can also dot pack this right here if we want. Give this a pad Y like 20 to push down the screen a little bit. And that looks good. Now, notice we didn't name this. We didn't go like my underscore button equals like we normally would. Since we're looping through here, we don't need to do that. And since each of these have a variable, we don't need to distinguish between each one. They're all going to be the same, right? So if we click on one, that means definitionally the other ones can't be clicked on. That's what a radio button is. You can only click on one at a time. So we could do it this way. So, okay, that looks good. Now, there's a couple of different ways to figure out which one you've clicked on. You can either create a button, and then whenever you click that button, it'll sort of like submit it, and then you can do something, or you can add a command right to the radio button. We're gonna do both here just so I could show you kind of how to do that. So let's create button, and let's just call it my underscore button. This is gonna be a tb.button. We wanna put it in root. We want the text to say something like, click me, right? And let's give this a command of clicker, right? So we're gonna click the button and run this clicker function. So before we do that, let's my underscore button dot pack this guy, put it on the screen, give it a pad Y20 to kind of push it down the screen a little bit. So while we're at it, let's also create a label so we can output, when we click on something, we can output it onto the screen. Hey, you clicked on whatever, pepperoni, right? So I'm gonna call this my underscore label. It's gonna be a tb.label. We want it to be in root, and we want the text to start out saying, you selected nothing, right? So then let's go my underscore label dot pack, give this guy a pad Y20 to push down the screen a little bit. Okay, so now we've got this clicker function we need to create. So let's come up here and create it. So let's go clicker function, and let's define clicker. And here we just want to change the label. So let's go my underscore label dot config, and we want the text to say, and let's create an F string, and let's say you selected, and then let's put in a variable. So what variable? Well, it's this variable right here, right? Our string var variable. So we want to my underscore toppings dot get this, right? And that's a function, so put your brackets there. So that's all there is to it. Let's go ahead and save this and run it, make sure that worked. So head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run python rad.py. And when we do, we get pepperoni, cheese, veggie. That looks good. You selected nothing. When I click on veggie, you can see it's red because we selected danger. The boot style of danger is red, right? Now, if we click this button, it says you selected veggie, and we're good to go. That's all there is to it. So cheese, pepperoni. So that's awesome, very easy. But what if you don't want to use a button, right? What if you just want to click cheese and have it automatically update? Well, very, very simple. So let's come down here, and right here in our button, we've given it a command of clicker. We can just take that thing and apply it to the radio button itself. So come up here inside of our radio button, pop that in there, command equals clicker, save it, head back over here, run this guy one more time. And now when we click cheese, boom, it says you selected cheese. Very cool,
Whoa.
You selected pepperoni. So just depending on the flow of your program, what you need it to do, you might want to have a button. So if somebody's like filling out a form or something and there are other things in the form you want them to fill out, name, email address, whatever, you probably don't want them to click this button and then boom, it submit the form, right? You would want to click this button, select pepperoni, finish filling out the rest of the form, and then click a order button or whatever. Boom, then it says pepperoni. So you could use either way, just depends on what you're doing. So, okay, that's cool. So now we've got these things working. But when it comes to radio buttons, they're actually buttons too. These are nice little round things you can sort of toggle, but you can do the same thing with buttons themselves. So how do we do that? Well, I'll show you how to do that right now. And there's actually two different styles you can use in Bootstrap to do that. So let's come back over to our code. And let's create actual radio buttons. Radio button buttons. There we go. Actual radio button buttons, right? So this is a good way for me to also show you a second method to do radio buttons. You know, up here, we created a list of all of the buttons we wanted, and then we looped through it here. Well, that might be overly complicated if you've only got one or two things you want as your radio button thing. So you might want to just create them manually. So how do you do that? Well, we can do that. I'm going to call it radio button 1 and radio button 2. And we'll just set that equal to a tb dot radio button, just like before. And we want to put it in root. Now, we make them into actual buttons with a boot style. So let's set the boot style equal to, and let's change up the color. I'm going to call this info color. But to make it an actual button, we call the tool button boot style, and that will create an actual button. And we have to do the same thing as the other radio buttons. We have to set a variable. So let's set that equal to _topping again, because remember up here we did the same thing, right? We also need to set a text. What is the button going to say? Well, I'm just going to say radio button 1, right? There we go. We also need a value, right? So I'm just going to say radio button 1. And we also need to give this a command of clicker. So when we click on it, we want to run that clicker function, right? So I'm going to copy this whole thing. And we actually also need to rb1.pack this guy, give it a pad y of 20. Now I did this on its own line. You could also do it at the end of it, but I like to do it on their own lines when you're doing them manually. So, all right, let me get rid of that and paste this thing in again. And let's call this RB2. And this is also going to be a tool button. But we can also do the second style of ttkbootstrap tool button, and that is an outline. So I'll show you both of them. This one is just tool button. This is tool button and outline. All right, so again, same variable, but instead of radio button 1, we want it to say radio button 2. And for the value, it also wants to be radio button 2. Okay, so let's rb2.pack this guy. Make sure we put him on the screen, give him a pad y of 20 to push down the screen a little bit. Save this, head back over here, run this guy one more time. And now we have two buttons down here, and they're actual buttons. And it's the info color, this sort of light blue. This one is the regular one. It's solid, right? When you hover over it, it changes to dark blue. This one is outline. When you hover over it, it changes like that, but it's outlined otherwise. So that's kind of cool. And the same thing occurs. If we click this one, it says you selected radio button 1, and this one is unselected. If we click this one, boom, it says here radio button 2, and this one gets unselected. Because with radio buttons, you can only have one at a time. Likewise, if we come up here and click cheese, boom, these two buttons both become unselected because these are all the same radio button series, I guess you would call it. And again, it says you selected cheese. So veggie, cheese, pepperoni, radio button 1, veggie, radio button 2, cheese, whatever you like, all the different things. And that's all there is to it. So those are radio buttons with TTK Bootstrap. Very simple, very straightforward. Just remember, you use the same sort of functionality as a regular Tkinter radio button. The only real difference is you add a boot style and it changes the color. Otherwise, you just treat them like any other radio button in Tkinter. And there you go.
Nào anh đâu để phải được content đi gọi là ngồi xem hướng dẫn chung. Mặc dù mình biết là mình sẽ không dùng cái này đó. Giờ xem đúng kia cho biết thôi chứ mình không dùng rồi đó. Nhưng lỡ trong bootstrap tụi mấy bạn đẹp lắm anh à. Tệ quá.
We're gonna look at sliders with TTK Bootstrap. And these are technically called scales, but that's silly. It's a slider. I know, look at it in this video.
Đi bỏ luôn. Mình tốc độ mà.
In this video, we're gonna look at the scroll bar with TTK Bootstrap. And there's several different things we can do with this. We can make it sort of square. We can make it kind of rounded. We can change the color and do all the things. So that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it scroller.py, and it's our basic TTK. Look at this. We wanna put it in root, and it's just gonna be used as a container to hold the things to put a scroll bar in. So we're not really gonna see it or anything. So it could be a TTK Bootstrap frame or a regular Tkinter frame, really doesn't matter. And so let's my_frame.pack this guy. Let's give it a pad Y of like 20, push it down screen a little bit. So, okay, now let's create a scroll bar. And I'm gonna call this my_scroll. And this is gonna be a tb.scrollbar. And we wanna put it in my_frame, right? So here we can give this an orient of, let's say vertical. We want it to go up and down, right? Otherwise it would be horizontal. And here's where we can do some different things. Let's give this a boot style of, and you can use all your regular boot styles with this: primary, secondary, light, dark, info, success, danger, whatever color you want, all the regular boot styles that we've looked at in all these other videos in this series. So, you know, whatever you like there. Let's go danger, make it red and annoying looking. I don't know. You could put it, I would probably use dark with this superhero theme, but I'll just do danger for now just to make it obnoxious and funny looking. Now, the only other option you have as far as boot styles is you can leave it like this and it'll just be a square scroll bar, like a normal default scroll bar. Or you could make it round and it'll be slightly rounded. So we'll do round for now. Maybe we'll play with this in a minute. So, okay, now we need to pack this, guys. So let's go my_scroll.pack. And we want to put this on the side of, let's say, the right side. And let's give it a fill of Y. So Y is up and down, vertical. Okay, so now let's just create a text widget. So we have something that we can, you know, scroll, right? So let's go text widget. And I'm just gonna call this my_text. And this is gonna be a regular text widget because I'm not sure there is one with TTK Bootstrap, but it doesn't matter. We're just gonna use a regular text widget. And we wanna put this in my_frame. And let's give this a width of like, I don't know, 30 and like a height of 25. And now here the important thing is, and let me put this on another line, we want a Y scroll command of my_scroll.set. And let's also give this a wrap of none. So there's no word wrapping inside the text box. And while we're at it, let's give it a font of Helvetica and like a size of 18 so the font's nice and big. So this Y scroll command will set our my_scroll bar, this guy right here, as the scroll bar for this widget, right? This is just basic Tkinter scroll bar stuff, has nothing to do with TTK Bootstrap. You would do this for any sort of scroll bar using regular Tkinter or TTK or this or anything else. So, all right, that looks good. So now let's my_text dot pack this guy. And I don't think I want to give it any sort of padding because we don't want the frame to show here. We just want the text widget to show, so we won't give it any padding. Okay, so finally, we need to config the scroll bar. Once we've created it, we always need to then config it. So let's go my_scroll.config. And let's give this a command of my_text.yview. And that'll sort of associate our scroll bar with our text widget, right? So here we set it, and here we give it a command so that whenever we move it, it knows to move this guy right here. So, okay, let's go ahead and save this and run it. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run python scroller.py. And when we do, we get this annoying red scroll bar. And if we type some stuff here, we can see the scroll bar moves and we can scroll. You'll notice it has a slight roundedness to it, right? So that's cool. If we want to take that off, we could come up here to our boot style and our scroll, and we defined it and just take off that round. If we save this and run it, you see now we have just the regular sort of default square scroll bar. Whatever you like, that's pretty cool. So let's play around with this very quickly one more time. Instead of danger, let's change this to dark, and I want to bring that round back. And this is probably what I would do if I was actually making an app using this color scheme, because I don't know, I think that looks kind of modern and cool having it dark like that. And there we go. So that's a scroll bar. Now, if you wanted to change this into, sort of down here, horizontal, you would just change your orient to vertical, and this, instead of Y, it would be X. And instead of this Y view, it would be X view, right? So Y is up and down, X is left and right. That's really all there is to it. Also this, instead of Y scroll command, it would be obviously X scroll command, right? So basically just change all the Ys to X's, and you've got yourself a horizontal scroll bar instead of a vertical one. So those are scroll bars with ttkbootstrap. Very easy, very cool, and pretty fun. In this video, we're going to look at the separator, this line thing here, and the size grip, this little dotted thing in the corner here that allows us to do this. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it sep.py, short for separator.py, I guess. And we're using this quick, I'm ttk, say light 42. Those. Here, the main, that line, right? Dark light, and this tiny little separator. Now, for this, I'll show. So by default, it is horizontal, right? And you don't have to do orient equals horizontal. Obviously, we just saw that. By default, it's already horizontal. But if you want it to go up and down, you just change it to vertical. So if we save this and run it, now we have it going up and down, right? So, okay, that's cool. I'm gonna go ahead and change this back to horizontal. Using pack, we can change it to fill equals X, and X is left to right. If you were doing this vertical, up and down, you would change this to Y, right? But we're doing it horizontal, we'll put fill equals X. Now, if you do this, you'll notice we run this, it stretches the entire size of the app, which may be what you want, maybe not. So how do we change the size from not very little or very big, but some other measure? How do we do that? Now, normally with Tkinter, you would use a width attribute. So you would come up here and you would just say, width equals 200 or something, and that'd be good to go. Not so with the separator. With that, we need to use pad X. So pad X gives padding on either side, on the X axis, right? So if we gave it a pad X of, let's say 10, that would take just a little bit off of each side, right? So if we run this, you can see just a little bit off the edge. It doesn't go all the way to the end, right? So we would have to play around with this based on whatever you want. So if you gave it, say 100, and think of these as pixels, 100 pixels. See, now it's, got 100 on each side. So just play around with that and, get it to the size you want. It's not a great method, but it's sort of what we have, right? So that's the separator, very simple. The only other option is just to change the boot style, right? And so instead of danger, maybe we would say info, right? So if we save this and run it, now it's sort of light blue, right? So, okay, that's the separator. Now let's look at the size grip. And I don't find this to be all that popular, but you may find some use for it, so we'll look at it real quick. Let's create this guy. I'm gonna call this my_size grip. Very original. And this is just gonna be a tb dot size grip where you want color, that light blue, and just fill our app down. Or if for some weird reason you need to resize your app from inside of the app like this, in the pack. In this video, we're going to look at spin boxes, and this is a spin box. You can see you can just click it and sort of spin through each one. We can have it where when we click the button, this label changes, or we can have it whenever we just spin it, the label changes as well. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So we've got a file here. I'm just calling it spinner.py. It's our basic Tkinter starter code, and a hero theme, and that's box.
thì chắc cũng không.
And I'm going to call this my underscore spin. And this is going to be a tb dot spin box. And it's tb dot because we imported ttkbootstrap as tb. And we want to put this in root. And we want to give this a boot style. And here you can use all the different boot style colors that we've looked at in all the other videos in this series. So primary, secondary, info, success, danger, warning, light, dark, all of those things. Let's just go success here, make it nice and green and weird. And then let's my underscore spin dot pack this guy and give it a pad Y of like 20. Now there's several different things you could do with this. First, let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's give this a font of Helvetica and a size of 18, so it's nice and big and we can see this. Now also, I'm gonna put this on a separate line so it's easier to read. You can do spin boxes a couple of different ways. You can have words and other things in there, or you can have numbers. So we'll start out just with numbers. So if you wanna designate a range, you can just go from underscore equals, and let's start at 0, and let's go to, let's say 10, right? So that's really all we have to do. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory. And let's go python spinner.py. And when we do, we see right away, we get this sort of empty looking spin box. It's not empty. If we actually click it, it starts at 0, and then it goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? So we can go back down again and back up again. So that's to and from. And now you'll notice when we started this, there was nothing listed here. I'll talk about that in just a minute too. But before we do that, let's look at the other way to do this using words. So here, let's go spinbox list. And here we can just create a Python list. I'm just going to call it stuff because, you know, I have no imagination. Let's go John and April and Bob and Mary. So in order to use these, we just use a values tag and set that equal to our stuff, right? One thing to note, when you add a value, it will override your from and to. So we can leave that on there. It'll just override it. So here, let's go ahead and save this and run it. And when we do, we click this. Now it says John, April, Bob, and Mary. So one thing you'll notice, like I said, it's blank when it starts. And also the text seems to be highlighted. What's up with that? Well, with spin boxes, you can delete the thing that's in there and add your own thing, right? Just type it in. So now it's John, April, Bob, Mary, and Tim, right? So that's one sort of weird thing about spin boxes. Personally, I've never found a use for that, but I don't know, maybe you would find some sort of use for that. But we can disable that if we want by setting the state of the spin box. So let's come down here and set a state of, and let's set this to read only. So now when we run this, we won't be able to change it anymore by typing, but also you'll notice it's not highlighted, right? So if I click on this and hit delete and try to type something in, nothing happens, right? So that may be what you want as a default sort of thing. I usually would use that for my spin boxes because I don't want people changing them at runtime. So that's kind of interesting. Now, what about this thing where when we run this, it starts off being blank? Well, maybe that's what you want, maybe not. You can set the value of this if you want. Head back over to our code and let's set the value. Let's say set spin box default. And we're actually going to need to do this underneath the spin box because we can't set a default before we've created a spin box. So here we just call my underscore spin and we can dot set this guy. And you can set this to anything you want. So I'm going to set this to John by default. So that's the first item in our list. So that's what I want to set it as by default. So now when we come back over here and run this guy, boom, right off the bat, John is listed. And we can cycle back up all the way through it, spin up, spin down, all the good things. Very cool. So, okay, that's cool. But how do we decide if something has been selected? And by selected, I mean, it's the thing showing in the spin box right now. So for instance, April. How do we get April out of here if somebody has spun up to April? Well, we can .get our thing. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. Let's create a button, and it's just going to be my underscore button. And it's going to be a tb.button. And then let's spin a little bit, right? Fine, spinning here, and let's create a label. So screen. So now what? My underscore spin function. And we my underscore label dot config this guy. And we can set the text equal to my underscore spin dot get. And many things in Tkinter, you can dot get them. And same thing with spinbox. So that's cool. You can also set a string var to your spinbox and get that, but I find that sort of useless. It's just an extra step. So what I'll do is I'll just myspin.get whatever the spin box is. So let's come back here, run this guy one more time. And here, if we click me for John, boom, it says John there. If we spin it up to Bob and click it, boom, it says Bob. If we hit Mary, boom, Mary. And not to leave out April, boom, April. So that's how you can use a button. And our button is blue. That's interesting. I thought we put that as success. Oh, I misspelled success. Boom, there we go. So that works for the button, but what if you don't want to use a button? What if you just want to use the spin box itself? Well, you can give your spin box a command. So let's put this on another line and we can just call our spinny function. Same exact function, or you can use a different function, really doesn't matter. So now when we run this guy, hopefully our button is green. Yes, it is. Instead of clicking the button, if I just spin this up to April, boom, it says April. When I click this thing again, boom, Bob. So it's the actual little spin box toggle things that determine when the function gets called, when that command runs, right? And there we go. So that's spin box, pretty easy, pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of bells and whistles here. Personally, I don't really use the spin box all that much, but it certainly has a place in some apps, and if you need it, that's how you use it. Piece of cake.
Now.
Okay, in this video, like I said, we're gonna look at the tree view for TTK Bootstrap, and I'm not gonna get into the tree view in great detail. I've got other videos on that. I'm gonna take some of my older videos that I did on the tree view and put them into one big video, and I'll post that in a few days. If you wanna get into a deep dive on the tree view, you can look at that. But for now, I'm just gonna show you how to make a basic tree view, how to do the TTK Bootstrap styling and stuff that you would expect for this thing. And that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So here we've got a tree view, and you can see it's just this box thing with rows and columns. And we got first name, last name, email address. I just kept it very simple. We got some dummy data, first name 1, last name 1, email 1, etc. So that's what we're gonna look at in this video. So we've got a file, I'm calling it tree_view.py. It's our basic Tkinter story. So very simple, all there is to it. So now let's create a simple tree view. So I'm gonna call this my_tree, and it's gonna be a tb.treeview. And it's tb dot because up here we imported TTK Bootstrap as tb. And here we just want to put this in a root, and we want to select a boot style. And these are the same boot style colors that we've used for all the TTK Bootstrap widgets, right? So you have primary, secondary, success, info, warning, danger, light, dark, all the things. So I'm just gonna go success, so that's that green color. And then we want to set the columns to whatever our columns are gonna be. Well, right here we defined our columns as columns, so we're going to set columns equal to columns. And here, let me put this on another line. We want to show, and we want to show the headings. Now this will show, the headings at the top of each column, which we haven't actually defined yet, but that'll do that. So, okay, that looks good. So now we want to show these headings. We have to define the headings, right? So let's go my_tree.heading. And then here we just designate each column. So the first one is first_name. That's this thing right here. But then we put a comma, and then the text for that heading is going to be what? Let's just go first name. So you notice this is more like a variable name, and this is more like the text that's going to show on the tree view. So, it's capitalized, it's got a space in there, it looks nicer, right? So let me just copy this, and we'll do this a couple more times. So we have first, and then this one will be address. Make it look nice and pretty. Okay, so that looks good. So now let's create some sample data, right? Now, normally you would have real data, but we don't have any real data. This is just a tutorial. So I'm gonna go ahead and create some. So let's create a Python list that's empty. And now let's fill it with some fake data. So let's go for in range of 1 through 20. So we're gonna have 20 rows, right? And then for each row, we want contacts.append, and it's contacts.append because, well, let's change this to contacts. All right, so we're gonna append into this empty Python list. What do we wanna append? Well, let's create a list here. So let's choose F strings, and for each one, I'm gonna say the first name and then just pass in a number.
No.
So that'll be n, that's this guy right here. So for each one of these, so the first time we loop through this, the n will be 1. The second time we loop through this, the n will be 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time we loop through here, this n will change. So this will allow the data that shows up on the tree view to be first 1, first 2, first 3 for each row, right? So, all right, that looks good for that. Now we also need to do the same thing for last and com, right? All right, so just some basic dummy data. We'll cycle through and do 20 rows of that. So now all of this fake data has been appended to this Python list. Now we just need to put that list on our tree view, right? So we can do that right here. And let's do another loop. Let's go for contact in contacts, right? And it's contacts because that's the name of our list here. Contact singular because we just make that one up. That's how loops work. And then let's go my_tree.insert. And we want to put this at the 0th spot. So from 0 to end. And then what value do we want? Well, whatever that contact is. Okay. So, all right, that's really kind of all there is to it. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory. And let's run Python tree_view.py. And you know what? We forgot to pack our tree view onto the screen. Why didn't you remind me? So let's see where we created our tree view right here. We obviously need to my_tree.pack this guy. Let's give this a pad Y of 20, push it down the screen a little bit. So, all right, that should work now. Head back over to our terminal, run this guy again, and there we go. And that's all there is to it, right? So we've got first one, first two, first three. We can use our mouse little scroll button to scroll down this guy. And there we go. So here we have our columns, first name, last name, email, and everything looks great. Now this whole thing is green because that's the boot style we selected, right? So we could go danger, right? Save this, run it. And now we've got the nice red, horribly ugly, right, tree view. So that's really all there is to it. Now, like I said, we're not going to dive deep into how to use tree views because with ttkbootstrap, you just use your tree view like you would in a regular Tkinter widget, right? Just use all the same attributes that the regular Tkinter widget tree view has, and you're good to go. So there's nothing specific to ttkbootstrap that you need to change except adding a boot style to change the color, basically, right? And like I said, I'll try and put together a deep dive of the tree view because it's really interesting. I could do 40 or 50 videos on it alone. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with it. And in fact, I have in past videos on my other codemy.com channel. So I'll put together a bunch of those videos into one big video, upload it to this channel sometime in the next few days or so if you're interested in doing a deep dive on the tree view. And then of course, if you wanted to make it into a ttkbootstrap tree view, you just do what we did in this video to use a ttkbootstrap tree view. In this video, we're going to look at message boxes for ttkbootstrap. So we click this button, boom, a little box pops up. It's got a little message, a little title, a little icon. We can click yes or no. If we click no, hey, you click no. If we try it again and click yes, hey, you click yes. Now there are a bunch of these different dialog boxes that you can use. You can ask questions, you can show warnings, you can give info, all that stuff. We're gonna look at all of that in this video. So I've got our basic starter code that we've always got. We're using the superhero theme. We've talked about that in another video. So, okay, now the next thing you're gonna notice is this root icon bitmap. Now this is the little icon that shows up when we run this file. So if we save this, I'm calling this mbox.py, head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run Python mbox.py. That icon is this little icon right up here we've designated. That's the icon, right? So when we have a message box pop up, it will have its own icon, but it'll just show the default ttkbootstrap icon unless you make a little bit of a change right here. So we need to copy this line and let me say message box icon here. And it's the same exact code. We just set a default equal to this, right? Now you might think, hey, do we need this line anymore? Yeah, we do. We can comment this out. And if we run this again, we're going to get no icon basically here, just the default thing, right? So we have to keep both of these lines. It's really kind of weird. I have no idea why that's the case. But let's say right here, main app icon. And then here we've got the message box icon. So, okay, that's good. So now let's build out this app. So let's create a button. I'm just going to call it my button. It's going to be a tb.button. We want to put it in root. We want the text to say, click me. Woo. And let's give this a boot style of, I don't know, danger to make it red, and a command of, I don't know, clicker, right? So every time this button gets pressed, we want to run the function clicker. So we don't have that yet. We'll create that in just a second. But for now, let's my_button.pack, put this guy on the screen. Let's give this a pad Y of 40 to really push it down the screen. So there's our button. And here we need to define our clicker function here. And we'll do that in just a second. And let's give this a font of, I don't know. So now we've got this function called clicker. And every time you press this button, we call this function. So what do we want to do? Well, let's create a dialog. So I'm going to call this MD, short for message dialog, or MB, short for message box, whatever. It doesn't really matter at all. And this is going to be a message box. Now here we have to designate what type of message box we want. So let's go yes, no. There's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 of these. We'll go over all of them in a second. But for now, we'll just do yes, no. And let's create a list of these. So let's go yes, no. And I'll add these as we go through them all. So here we could say display some message here. This is going to be the message that pops up in the middle of the box. So whatever you want to display in your message box, type it in there. And then here is the title. So this will go on the title bar up at the top, right? So, okay, that looks good. Now, for now, let's just run this and see what we have. So let's save this, head back over to our code, run this guy again. So here we've got this thing, we click it, boom. It says display some message here. Here's the title. You'll notice there's our little icon up there, and we have a yes or a no. Well, if we click no, what happens? Well, we don't know yet. So what does happen? Well, let's come down here and display button click, right? So let's go my_label.config, and we want to set the text equal to, and I'm just going to create an F string, and then I'm going to say you clicked. And then inside of here, we're just going to go MB. So whatever you clicked here will get assigned to this variable, and it will output right there. So let's go ahead and save this, head back over here, run this guy again. So we click me. So now when we click yes, it says you clicked yes. When you click no, it says you click no, right? So basically, if you click no, it's returning the word NO, capital NO. Now this is just a string. Now you can do stuff based on that, right? So you could do an if statement. Right, so let's go if MB equals no, then, we could print no, or whatever you wanted to do. Else, you would, print yes. Like whatever you wanted to do, you could do right there, right? So let me just comment all this out because it's kind of silly, but this is just an example of how you can do stuff logically based on what the person selects, right? Now, each of these things we're going to talk about, yes, no is the first one. There's lots of different message boxes. Each one returns a different thing. So you have to know what it returns in order to do your if-else logic correctly. And we'll see that in just a second. So, all right, but for now, I'm just going to, let's copy this and we'll just print out you clicked whatever just to see what each of these things do. So, okay, the first one was yes, no. We looked at that one. The next one is okay, right? So we'll just type in messagebox.okay. If we save this guy and run it and click here, now it says the button is just okay. And if we click this, it says you clicked none. Now this actually returns the word none, right? So it's a string, it's just none. You would do your logic if, MB equals none, do this, else do something else, right? So, okay, that's kind of interesting, I guess. The next one is okay cancel. So let's come down here and okay cancel. You'll never guess what this one does, right? Maybe you will guess. It does okay or cancel, right? So if you click okay, it says you clicked okay. If you click cancel, it says you clicked cancel, right? So it's returning okay or cancel. All right, so that's okay cancel. Now, obviously, whatever you want to do in your app, that's going to determine which of these you use, right? If you want to give the user the ability to cancel or click OK, you would use OK cancel. If you want them to answer a question, yes or no, you would use yes or no, right? If you just want to give them a message and have them close it, you might just use OK, right? It just depends on what you're trying to do in your app, right? So, okay, the next one is show info. So actually, this is show underscore info. In regular Tkinter, it's show info without an underscore. And in ttkbootstrap, for some reason, it's show underscore info. I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's what it is. So again, we can come up here. And here it says display some message here, but it has this little icon, this little info, right? You're showing info. This is the little info icon, right? And if you click OK, it returns none. So, okay, maybe you want the little info icon to pop up. If so, you would use show info, right? We also have show error, right? So this one's actually kind of interesting, right? Because if you're doing error handling in your app and you want to show an error that's popped up, you would probably want to use this. And this is nice because I don't know if you could hear that or not. It made a little ding. It went ding, a little warning ding. And it also has this big red X, like warning, right? So that's interesting. If we click OK, it returns again, none. So, all right, that's cool. So, okay, that's cool. Let's show error. And we also have show underscore question. So we can change this one to show underscore question. Save this guy, clear this screen. It's getting unruly. Run this guy again. And here we get this little question mark and we get yes or no. Now, if we click yes here, it says yes. If we click no, it says no. Again, you'll hear maybe it'll pick it up on the microphone. A little ding and ding, right? So that's what that does. So, all right, that's cool. Oh, that was interesting. Let's run that again. I probably should have mentioned that. If you click yes, it returns yes. If you click no, it returns no. If you come up here and click the little X, it does none. So keep that in mind. That's the case for all of them as well. So, okay, that's cool. I'll start another line here. And the next one is show underscore warning. Show underscore warning is very similar to show underscore error. So let's run show underscore warning. Save this guy. Run him again. But instead of a big red X, you get this sort of warning, like, almost like a traffic sign, but with an exclamation mark. And when we click OK, it's none. When we click the X here, it also returns none. So, all right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I feel like there's one or two more. So what else do we have? So we did yes, no. We also have yes, no, cancel. So this is very much like yes, no, cancel. But instead of 2 buttons, you have 3 buttons, which is kind of interesting. So if we run this guy, we get yes, no, and cancel. If we click yes, you click yes. If we click no, you click no. If we click cancel, we get cancel. And again, if we click the X, we get none. So, all right, that's interesting. Finally, one more, we have retry and cancel. All right, so this is kind of interesting. We have retry, cancel. And I'm guessing you could probably guess what this one's going to do. Right? It's not rocket science here. We have retry and cancel. And if we click retry, it returns the word retry. And if we click cancel, it returns the word cancel. So that's pretty much it. And none if you click the little X in the top. So those are message boxes. Very, very useful, very cool, very easy to do. And that's kind of all there is to it. If you want to learn more about these, you can go to, let's see, ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io and click on API and then come down here to message box. And it has each of them listed here. So here's the OK one, here's the OK cancel one, and it has all the different little attributes you can play around with, right? Whether to ring the bell or not, the title, the message, we've already did those two. So you can come through here and read all these if you're interested, but we pretty much hit the main points and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're gonna look at the color chooser for ttkbootstrap, and that's this guy right here. You can see, ooh, it's very neat looking. And if you can click on this, boom, it'll pick a color, give you all the data. We can click OK, and now we're gonna change our color to that color. Let's change it to blue, whatever. It doesn't matter what you do with the color that you choose. That's kind of irrelevant, but I'll show you how to get the actual information you look at in this video. So I've got a file, I'm just calling it cc.py. We've imported ttkbootstrap as TB. We pip installed that many videos ago, and we're using the superhero themes. TB color chooser, I guess, right? And we don't have this function yet. We'll create it in just a second. So for now, let's just screen a little bit. So .dialogues, color chooser dialog. And you'll notice the capitalization, the C is capitalized, this C is capitalized, and this D is capitalized. So color chooser dialog. And now that will allow us to use it. Now it's kind of weird since we're kind of importing everything from ttkbootstrap. Why do we have to import these dialogues separately? I don't know, you just have to, right? That's how that works. And so let's create a color chooser. So I'm gonna call her dialog, right? Right, and then, you know, we com directory, this is message box. We're gonna have colors and click earn something, right? Create a variable, or we could chooser, and then color chooser variable, call it colors. And we're gonna set this equal to my underscore color, which is our color chooser, what we defined right here. And then dot result. Now, this will return 3 things, and I'll show you what those 3 things are in just a second. But for now, let's output to the label. So remember, we have this label called my_label. So let's .config this guy and set the text equal to colors, whatever is returned here, right? So, all right, let's go ahead and save this and run it, see what we got here. So we click this and let's pick a nice screen. Now you'll notice it returns hue, saturation, and luminosity, HSL. It also returns red, green, blue, RGB, right? You've probably heard of RGB in color things in the past. That stands for red, green, blue. It also returns the hex code. Now this hex code is useful. This is really what you want, the hex code. Because anytime you're using colors, you want the hex code, right? If you want to change a color, use the hex code. I mean, you could use these things too, but they're not commonly used for that. But just for now, let's just click OK and see what it returns. And you'll notice it returns a string of numbers. Now, that's not that useful. Let's come up here and pick the most top rightest color. And that's hue of 0, 150, red of 255, green of 0, 0, and this hex color code. So now when we click this, you can see it returns these 3 things. And if we run this again and click on this again, and you can see the RGB is the first one. So 255, 0, and 0. That's this column right here, 255, 0, and 0. Then we have HSL, 0, 150, 0, 150. And finally, we have the hex color code, FF000, FF000. So that's cool, but how do we get each of these individual things? It's returning 3 of them. How do we get each individual one? Well, super easy. There's a little function you can call, but instead of calling colors, you can call the thing you want. So say, for instance, .hex. So here, let's go .hex, .hsl, and .rgb. So here, if we just want the .hex, we can do that, save this, run it. Here, let's pick the red again, and boom, it's just returning that hex, right? So if we wanted the RGB, instead of .hex, we would call .rgb, right? So if we save this and run it, I know, very exciting. If we click this, pick this color again, it's just returning to 255, 0, and 0. Same for HSL. We could just go, HSL, and that will return the HSL. So I like the hex. You're almost always going to use the hex. So that's what we want to return. Now, let's change the background color of our app to chosen color, right? So let's just be goofy and play around with this. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. This is kind of a goofy example of why you might want to use this, but I don't know, you could do it like this. And let's change this to this pink. Whoa, there we go. Our background is now pink. We could do orange. It's orange. We could do blue. And you could do this for anything, right? Any widget, you could change the color. So if you wanted to change the color of your button, you'd do the same thing, right? Just configure your button, set the background color to, that hex color code right there. And that's all there is to it. So kind of a goofy example, but I don't know. There's lots of different things you would use this for. And I can't go over all of those examples. There's thousands of them. So there's just one little simple example on how to use it. The main thing you really want is just to understand, to get the color code out of here, you're going to call your colors.hex. Now we went colors.hex. You could just as easily, instead of creating this variable right here, you could just go, let's see, let's come in here and go mycolors.result.hex. Right? If you wanted to just string along an object-oriented sort of thing with this, which is our color chooser, right? We called it my color, and it returns a result, and that result can be a hex or an HSL or an RGB, right? So really, either way that works, but I find it cleaner and easier just to create a variable right here, add this in here, and then just call colors.hex to get the hex code.
Ra cái giọng bộ này hay phết. Cái khó tức là thay vì cái team họ xấu quá mình có thể đổi màu trong từng cái phần một, kiểu thích đổi màu chữ thì đổi màu này họ đổi màu nút, mình đổi bằng cái tính năng chọn màu. Cái này khá là hay, còn lại thì vẫn dở.
All right, this is going to be a very short video, but a very cool video. And that's because we're going to look at the scrolled text widget. And that is just what it sounds like, a text widget that is built in with a scroll bar. Look at that. Woohoo! right? So in the past, we had to create an actual scroll bar widget and add it to a text box or add it to a frame or add it to whatever. In TTK Bootstrap, there's actually a widget built into it that has a scroll bar right there, and you could do a couple cool things with it. You could hide it, you could show it, you could have it when you hover your mouse over, it appears or doesn't appear. Very cool and very easy to use. And that's what we're gonna look at in this video. Now, I don't know, 10 videos ago or so, I did a video on scroll bars with TTK Bootstrap, and you could use scroll bars in the normal way that you would with Tkinter. Or you can, if you're using a text widget, you can just use this little trick I'm about to show you right now. So I've got a file, I'm calling it scrolled text, are both capitalized. Everything here is lowercase. So that's all we have to do. We just have to import it. Now I know we imported pretty much everything here in TTK Bootstrap as TB, but we still have to, for some reason, import this guy as well. So let's go to text, not this, imported that. This time we're calling just straight up scrolled text. And that's because we imported that right there, right? So we want to put this in root, and now we can give this a height of, let's say, cut off mid-word and have half the word on one line and the other half of the word on the other line below it. We want to wrap the entire word down to the line below. So there we go. So really that's all we need. So let's go my_text.pack. And let's give this a pad Y like, I don't know, 15 or so, push down the screen a little bit. So let's head back over to our terminal and run this guy. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run Python scroll_text.py. And we have a typo, as we, of course, need an equal to sign there. Okay, so put an equal to sign, come back, clear the screen, run this guy again. All right. And there we go, boom. You'll notice it doesn't appear now, but if we start to type and, we gotta get to the end and keep going, you can see over there on the right, it's adding the little scroll bar thing, and we can scroll up and down, and it is fantastic. And that's all there is to it. So there's one thing I want to show you about this. In addition, we can also give this an auto hide of true. Now by default, auto hide is set to false. As we just saw when we ran it, the scroll bar was there even though we didn't even need it until we started typing text, and then it kind of, popped up or whatever. If we set auto hide to true, head back over here, run this guy, you'll notice there is no scroll bar at all until I hover over, and then it kind of appears. Same deal if we start to type a bunch of stuff. You'll notice the scroll bar isn't automatically showing up. It's been hidden. It's auto hide. Auto-hided. It's auto-hided. But if we move our mouse over, boom, then it pops up and we can use it. Now, some people might like that, some people might not. Personally, I don't know. I don't really care for that. It seems a little confusing. I want the scroll bar to just always be there. So what I would do is leave that off, or you could set this to auto hide equals false. Save this, head back over here, run this guy again, and we're gonna get just the default thing where the scroll bar is just already there always. And as you kind of move down, a little scrolly thing appears. And very cool. So what else can we do to this? Well, we can use all of our boot styles if we want. Boot style. And you've got all of the boot styles that we've been talking about throughout this series: primary, secondary, info, success, danger, light, dark, any other ones that I might have missed. And you probably want to spell boot style right. And this won't change the text box itself, but it will change the scroll bar color. So if we head back over here and run this guy again, now our scroll bar is red because that's the danger color, right? Very cool. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And very neat. Now, if we head over to the TTK Bootstrap documentation at ttkbootstrap.readthedocs.io and then click on API, and let's see here. If we scroll down here, you can see there's a scrolled frame and a scrolled text. If you click on scrolled text, you can see some code and some things here. If you want to read more about this, you can see you can add boot style. You can also add padding. You'll notice you can designate vertical or horizontal bars. So you can have a V bar or an H bar. The V bar is default. We've just been looking at that. But if you wanted to add an H bar for a horizontal one, you could do that. So head back over here and let's go H bar equals true. And this just takes true or false. It's a Boolean. So if we come back over here, run this guy again. See now we've got horizontal and vertical. And if we scroll all the way over, let's see, now this one sort of appears and works. And very cool. So that's the scroll text widget. So much easier than creating a scroll bar and physically adding it to your text widget or to a frame or whatever. Very awesome, very easy to use, and that's all there is to it.
Tính ra nãy giờ trên YouTube hơn 100 phút nãy mình không làm cái gì hết, nhàn hạ tại đó luôn. Thì chưa giờ thấy cuộc sống nhàn hạ rồi. Thôi, nghỉ lao tí đi. Nghỉ lao tí đi các bạn ơi. Còn nhiều quá không chịu rồi nó đạo đâu. Tiếp tục thôi. Và còn tầm khoảng giờ xong. Thôi, tiếp tục thôi. Tiếp tục cuộc chơi thế nào.
In this video, we want to look at scrolled frames for ttkbootstrap. And it's very similar to scrolled text boxes. If you saw that video, you're probably good to go on this. You're going to pick this up almost immediately. If not, it's going to take like 30 seconds to explain this. Should be pretty easy. So this is what we're going to build, just a very simple side of it. And you can see it scrolls, right? So ttkbootstrap makes kind of add it to a frame. It's very sloppy. In this video, we're going to look at toast messages. What are toast messages? Well, if you look down there, there it is right there, sort of the bottom of the screen, fades away. We can click it again. Hey, it pops back up. Little message, little icon next to it, little Windows thing. And that's what we're going to look at. So I've got some basic Tkinter starter code that we always have. We calling it toasty.py because we're doing toast messages. And we're importing TTK bootstrap as tb toasty.py because we're
Con tạo tiếng Anh đi.
Doing toast messages. And we're importing TTK Bootstrap as TB. We're using the superhero theme as we always do in these videos, and everything else is pretty much the same. So in order to use these, we actually have to import these. This is the bootstrap. And notice the T and the N are capitalized. That's kind of important. So let's come down here and let's create one of these things. I'm just going to call it toast. And this is going to be a toast notification. Again, capital T, capital N. And then inside of here, we can give this a title. So I'm going to say my toast title, whatever. And there's a bunch of different attributes we can play with. After title, obviously we want a message. And we could say, this is a toast message. Woohoo! All right. There we go. And then we can also set a duration if we want. So this is in milliseconds. So if I want 3 seconds, that would be 3,000 milliseconds, right? There we go. And we could also give this an alert. This can be either true or false. I'm going to do true. And this will just give a little ding, a little like system bell whenever the alert pops up. You may want that, you may not. I'll put it on there. I don't even know if you can hear it with the microphone set up here, but you know what a normal Windows system ding is. You know, it goes ding, you know, just it'll do that. So we'll put that as true. And then finally, you could put a position, and this is going to be a tuple, and it takes 3 things: horizontal, vertical, and anchor. So if you don't put a position at all, if you leave this completely off, it'll just show up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Now, that's a little bit of a problem for me because I've got 2 monitors set up here, and I'm recording on the left monitor, and the default monitor is my right monitor, so it'll show up on the right monitor, and you guys won't be able to see it. So I'm going to move it over 1915 pixels by 30 pixels. And instead of it being in the bottom right, I want to put it in the bottom left. And so that's the southwest. Now for the anchor position, this last thing, now this is a string, and it could be all of the normal sort of directional things in Tkinter: north, south, east, west, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast, etc. Right? So all of those normal things you can use. So we'll just put that like that, and that looks good. Now we need something to trigger this thing, so I'm just going to create a little button. I'm going to call this my_button, and it's second. For now, let's my_ message to it. So let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my tkinter.com directory, and let's run Python toast.py. And when we do, we've got this button here. If we click it, boom, it pops up. After 3 seconds, it fades away. Now I'm going to do it again without talking. See if you can hear the little alert ding. Probably not. But 1, 2, 3, boom, it fades away. So that's kind of all there is to it. Now we can take out the duration if we want. Save this and run it, see what happens then. We click this, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 2009, just seems to be going on and on. If we click it, it disappears. Or if we click somewhere else in the app, nope, we have to actually click the thing itself. So if you don't have a duration, it'll just be there kind of forever, right? And also we can play around with the position. Remember, this is horizontal and vertical. So if we want it to go up more, I don't know, we can make this 300 or so. We run this. Now it's going to be way up here. So you can position this anywhere you want on a screen. Remember, your screen isn't like everybody else's screen, so you may want to keep that in mind when using a position. But, you know, pretty cool. And you see my toast title has a title here in bold, got the little Windows icon, and pretty simple. So remember, just import it up here in this first line, toast notification from ttkbootstrap.toast. I know up here we kind of imported everything. Why do we have to keep importing separate things? I don't know, it's just the way it is. But pretty simple. Again, just to use it, we call it toast notification. Got your title, your message, your duration. Let me uncomment that out. alert and position. And of course, you don't have to do a position, otherwise it'll just default into the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, and that's all there's to it.
Hết rồi, buổi học cuối cùng.
All right, so that is TTK Bootstrap in a nutshell. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about TTK Bootstrap and Tkinter in general, be sure to check out my tkinter.com YouTube channel. And of course, check out tkinter.com. Think about signing up for membership there. You get all my courses for one low price. And while you're there, be sure to grab a totally free PDF copy of my Tkinter widget quick reference guide book. This thing is awesome, has all the Tkinter widget attributes spelled out in great detail.
Bạn nào chơi sách thì hãy coi tập livestream phần thứ 10 nhé. Bạn có để link mấy tài liệu có tài liệu trong đó luôn.
Grab your free copy today. Just head over to tkinter.com/widget-book, enter your email address, and I'll send that right out to you. So yeah, I think that's it. My name is John Elder from tkinter.com, and I'll see you in the next video.
Vậy, ông thì không có đi diễn hứng thú vậy. B3 player, vậy cái này diễn hứng thú này. YouTube playlist. Chắc thì có rồi.
Video.
Vì sao lại có hả? Con kết thúc rồi. Đã kết thúc. Chúng ta đã học xong Tkinter Bootstrap và những gì đọc lại trong đầu mình là cái gì? Không có một cái gì hết. Mình nói thẳng luôn. Mình không đọc được một chữ gì trong đầu hết. Mình chả hiểu mình vừa coi gì. Nói thiệt thì nó cũng bootstrap phải cứ bootstrap chỉ học 5 tiếng rưỡi 6 tiếng đồng hồ ác vậy. Laser này vì đang là làm laser mà không làm UI. The fuck, chắc khó mà làm được. Ủa nó repair biết là có không? Tiên vui cũng có luôn. GWPS trước thì công nghệ lỗi thời. Nói chung là thấy cái dự án UI đó thấy là tự động mình có rồi. Khổ rồi. Làm game bằng JavaScript và không làm. Bạn là học AI không phải Mr. AI Linux này có vẻ hay. Từ từ đi. Widgets là thư viện để tạo trang web mà có hình động 3D các thứ. Nói chung là được dính tới 3D trên web là cái widget rất nổi tiếng. Học C và OOP 18 tiếng 35. Đây, dành cho bạn nào không biết học cái gì thì các bạn cần lập trình. Đây, 18 tiếng 35 phút. Cho bạn nào không biết học cái gì, các bạn cái từ học rồi. Thì xong hết muốn học nữa. Máy tính lượng tử. Oh my god, bạn đi hỏi đi bạn vui á. Blockchain. Oh my god. Học thiết kế. Ví dụ là game bằng TypeScript vô định full stack app SQL game đấy phủ 9 tiếng một ngày, này đủ tiếng 8 tiếng. Trong app chỉ có cam đậy. Giờ nói thiệt chứ lên kiếm cái app mua full stack đây nè, xong bạn mở trong chắc chắn có một link GitHub, rồi bạn copy về xong build. Cuộc sống nhạy nhàng chắc là có. Ví dụ đây, ví dụ này đi. Thì sẽ setup demo link đây. Wow, hướng dẫn từ đó được đỉnh vậy. Clone đi về xong build được xong rồi. Dạ lắm. Có app rồi hả? Cho xin cái tên đi bạn. Cho xin cái tên đi chi nhánh. Chắc hơi lâu đó. Dạ lắm rồi. Học hay gì trả lời của học không thấy Google Play tự cả rồi có tặng thì có phải có tiềm năng này. Nếu mà họ được build ấy chúng ta học được siêu sát đi tắt cái bài thôi học siêu sát.
This comprehensive C# course will take you from the basics of C# programming to advanced concepts, all while integrating exciting mini projects to solidify your learning. This course offers a structured path through essential topics such as syntax, object-oriented programming, data structures, and more. Abba teaches this course, and he will help you understand C# both theoretically and also gain practical experience in applying your knowledge to real-world scenarios.
Hey there, FreeCodeCamp, Abba here. Join me in walking you through everything you need to get set up with C#. Let's have a quick walk through the course content to let you know what's in store for you. We'll start with installing the Visual Studio program required to develop C# applications. You'll learn about data types including integers, strings, and many more, and how to manipulate them inside your code. Next, we'll dive into control flow. You'll discover how to use conditional statements and loops to control the flow of your program's.
Rồi sao bạn có tiếng gì bạn? Ông đi toàn một cái hack rồi đi bạn. Trời ông như toàn hack rồi đi. Hack cái lõ rồi. Bạn muốn học IT, bạn muốn cái gì thăng tiến sự nghiệp rồi chắc vậy. Bạn tới đúng nơi rồi đó. Ngay tại cái này tôi sẽ học về Linux, Python, hacker lõ, CCNA là gì quý? Visual virtualization nhầm, cái ảo chắc vậy. Và những chủ đề liên quan khác. Kênh YouTube này cái video ở đây học tập đăng ký để có nhiều video quá hay. Nhưng mình đâu phải là chỉ Python đâu.
This comprehensive C# course
Mình trung thành với
will take you from the basics of C# programming to advanced concepts, all while integrating exciting mini projects.
So in order to start developing with C# we need to install the
Đầu
latest
tiên chúng ta cần phải học đó là học cách tải Visual Studio 2022 về.
version of Visual Studio.
Mình
In
tải
this
rồi đi
case,
thôi.
it's currently 2022. So let's head over Google and type in Visual Studio 2022 download. We will be presented with two links. We have this one and this one. We want to use the second one which says download Visual Studio Tools. So if you press on that, and now we're presented with the download area. We have three editions: Community, Professional, and Enterprise. Community is free for students, open source contributors, and individuals, which is exactly what we need for the content of this course. We have the Professional Enterprise edition, which are paid for and only used by bigger companies or smaller teams. So let's go ahead and press free download. The download will start straight away. After the download is complete, let's start the installer. So double click on the executable and press yes to allow it for admin permissions. It'll pop up like this: Visual Studio Installer. Before you get started, we need to set up a few things so you can configure your installation. You can read the privacy policy in the software terms if you'd like, or you can just press continue. So it's getting the Visual Studio installer ready. So when you get to this section, everything here is all the different packages and tools you can install within Visual
White UWP 4. Bình tĩnh nha. Phải. Ủa, không có update mới nè. Coi nha, từ từ nha. Cái video bên Microsoft là video của từ cái từ khi nào? Đợi tí. Video của nó. Video này được không? Các bạn chọn có thể ăn ngay hai phải là đây.
Migration option for your UWP apps moving forward. And I want to clarify one thing. When we talk
Đây,
and you can get updated Visual Studio workload,
đây là update này. Tức là tầm khoảng 1 tháng trước là cái ứng BNI bị thay thế thành UI. Chắc mọi người nhiều. Ý là nếu học C# thì không ảnh hưởng nhiều, nhưng mà nếu mà làm UI thì có ảnh hưởng nhiều đó. Nhưng mà cái này là những UI không có tầm đâu.
Visual Studio 2022. The main one that we're concerned with in the contents of this course is the .NET desktop environment, so you can go ahead and press this one. It will then tell you in the bottom right hand corner the total space required is 6.52 gigabytes.
Anh ơi, anh tải cái dưới rồi sao anh? Nó có khác gì nhau không? Không, cái này hỏi thật đấy.
If you want to check out other packages, you can have a scroll through and read any other packages you may need and may want to install. Like I said, the only one required for this course is the .NET desktop environment. You can also deal with Node.js development, Python development, web development. If you need to deal with individual components like specific versions, you can access it here. If you need some more languages installed, you can access it here. This should automatically select your default language for you that's based on your system's language. And if you wanted to, you can also change the installation location in case you want to install it on a different drive or you just want it in a different folder. So now that we've selected the .NET desktop environment, we can go ahead and press the installation button. We do have two options down here. We have an install while downloading and a download all then install. If you have a reasonably fast computer, you can stick with the install while downloading and it will do the installation and the downloading at the same time. If you have a slow computer, it's preferred that you use this option to download it first and then install. It just means that it won't slow down your computer too much. So you can go for this one and press install. Now the installation will begin.
Chờ 5 tiếng.
So now that Visual Studio is finished installing, it will say, done installing, Visual Studio has been successfully installed. We recommend rebooting soon to clean up any remaining files. So this just means restarting your computer just so it has a chance to clean up any files that were kept during the installation process. So we can just press OK. If you have any other versions of Visual Studio installed, they'll also show up down here. And now that Visual Studio Community 2022 is installed, we can just press launch. So now it'll prompt you to sign into Visual Studio. We should definitely sign in, but just for now, I'm going to skip.
Chị ổng là bo góc trong khi mình là vuông góc. Quay, cuối 11 rồi.
But feel free to create an account or sign in if you already have one existing. We can skip this and then we get to choose your theme. I personally prefer the dark theme, but you can go with blue, blue extra contrast, or the light mode. So let's select dark and hit start Visual Studio. It will do a first time setup and it's already done and we're already inside Visual Studio.
Nè, cái áo ổng bo góc nè. Rồi không bo góc. Mình nhìn vuông vãi đái luôn. Wow, phân biệt đối xử nha. Màn hình Win 10.
2022. So that's it for the Visual Studio installation.
Okay.
So now that we got Visual Studio 2022 installed, let's see how to create your first project. So once you've opened Visual Studio 2022, you'll see this window popping up. You can clone a repository from things like GitHub and Azure DevOps, or open a project that you already have, or open a folder which may have projects inside, or you can create one from scratch. If you don't want to do any of these options, you can just open the Visual Studio program just on its own by clicking continue without code. So let's go down the create a project path. So click on create a new project and we'll get a list of all these different projects inside our system to be able to use. The ones we're going to be focusing on this course is going to be C# in the languages drop-down box, and the platform is going to be Windows, and the project type is going to be console. And they have one that uses .NET Core, which is for Linux, Mac and Windows, and one that uses the .NET Framework, which is Windows. So we want to go for this one. So press on this one and then press next. Here we have our project name, our location and our console app. So we can start with the project name and say, my first project. As you can see, it'll start copying it over to the solution name as well, and it tells you where the project will be created into. So it'll be creating a folder called my first project, which is the solution name, plus my first project, which is the project name inside that folder. If we change the solution name, you'll see it update. You can see here now we have multiple T's because we appended the solution name. The solution name is almost like a folder that holds lots of projects inside. So to begin with, we'll have one solution that has one project inside, and then later on in the course, if you feel like you want to add more projects to it, you can just add more to this solution. So let's get started and press create. So now we've created our very first project. And just to explain what's here, we have a static main void, which is the main entry point to our program. If you do a lowercase m, then the system's not going to recognize this main function because the .NET Framework requires this function to be found in order to run a C# console app. And you can see here in the errors, the program does not contain a static main function, and you can see it's capital M. And C# programming language is case sensitive, so make sure to include it. So now you understand how to use Visual Studio 2022 to create a project and also know where the main entry point is in C#. Let's get started with a Hello World example to kick off this course.
Sẽ là Hello World trước cho ông này không kịp làm luôn. Đầu tiên ở Visual Studio, sau đó ông nói gì chấm nét kìa. Đầu console. Thiệt không có cái đó. Ok, chúng ta dùng cái console app tạm đi. Đổ đi kìa. Cái folder này đi. Xong project sẽ tên là solution là C#, còn đây là C#. Được. Đó. Tôi sẽ tạo. Tôi tìm chấm nét 8. Chấm nét 8. Tôi sẽ tạo. Sang hội chợ 5 phút. Ok. Đơn giản không kỹ. Chỉ vậy thôi sao? Yeah, chúng ta biết được hello world. Chưa kịp viết máy viết luôn rồi. Đây, mất vui ghê á. Đó, là cách viết hello world. Console.write. Là khác với lại write nha. Có một cái nữa là console.write. Có sự test. Write khác write line nha. Write line. Cái rồi xong. Đây là một ví dụ cực kỳ dễ hiểu. Tôi viết chữ 2 xong viết hello. Theo như lý thuyết thì chữ 2 sẽ viết liền bên cạnh chữ hello luôn. Đây. Sẽ để đây là để cổ ấy. Okay. Thế này được. Để viết hello world trước rồi mình kịp viết.
So as we know, our main entry point to our application is the static void main. If we go inside here and press enter, then we can actually start writing. Static curly braces of hello world begins here and ends here. And within these curly braces, we have a class program, and also within the class program, we have the static void main. Copy each marks, and we can use. So if we undo it, then this comes up. If we delete it. If we delete it, then it doesn't know where console exists from. .write line, and then open the brackets and type in hello world. And now this works again. And the reason why this works is because we don't have to define that we're using system, we could just use it straight in here. If you have multiple lines like this, then you don't want to be using system right at the start. Ideally, you want to have the reference to it at the top of the screen and then use it throughout. So now that we've included back in the project, you can see that now these have turned gray and it says that it can be simplified. You press the little light bulb and we can say simplify member, and it doesn't really matter because we can just delete the rest now. So now that we've wrote hello world, let's press F5, which is a shortcut to the start button. As you can see, well, you couldn't really see because the program closed too quickly. And the reason for that is printed hello world to the console and then it didn't do anything else because there's nothing else for it to do. So the console simply closed. We can use another command called console read line, open the brackets and close the brackets and have a semicolon at the end. All this does is it waits here until the user inputs something, reads the next line of characters from the standard input stream. So although the program will actually be reading stuff, we just want this line to stop the application from closing. So now if we press F5 and run the program, you can see it actually says hello world and it's just waiting here flashing. And this flashing means it just sat at this console read line. So it doesn't matter what we type into here, it just waits for us to press enter. And as soon as we press enter, this line executes and the program finishes. Congratulations, you just wrote your first C# program. Welcome to the amazing journey of programming. So let's look at how to make
mình vừa viết xong được một đẳng cấp của C#. Và vừa nhận ra bây giờ là 12 rưỡi rồi. Trời ơi, làm sâu quá mất rồi đó. Thôi được rồi. Cái em này đọc sau đi quá đủ rồi. Đọc quá sâu rồi. Để kết thúc thì như vậy, như nãy thầy vừa nói, con sẽ viết một cái nữa gọi là console read line. Đó, read line. Để thầy chạy hết cỡ và làm gì nữa. Thì bây giờ Phan đã đổi từ 2 tập thành chấm cách. Thì lúc này con trỏ nó sẽ cùng ham với lại cái dòng chữ này luôn, sẽ đạt hơn so với việc mình viết dry line là cái con trỏ sẽ xem phía dưới. Nhằm ngôn ngữ lại nơi. Sau đó chúng ta sẽ viết là phát triển kiểu này line đi giá khó mình gắn một cái dữ liệu đây, cái dữ liệu chúng ta sẽ là string là chuỗi ký tự, đặt đây cho nó là a đi, nó sẽ viết a là những gì bạn vừa nhập ở trong cái phần đây. Viết format đi nhiều ghê. Đừng dùng string, hãy dùng pha kệ này, không quan trọng. Và nếu chúng ta F5 là chạy chương trình đây hello và những cái gì đó sẽ thấy thì right nó sẽ cái gì luôn, nó không xuất hàng. Nếu ra thì cái này nằm phía dưới, mình tập gì đó đại đi khi enter nó sẽ in ra cái từ em vừa nhập. Chứ kiểu gì đâu mới tạo lập trình nó vậy thì mình nên biết của CV của mình là mình làm C# để biết thêm về chất chất, muốn chất là đẹp hơn là phải ngựa tí cộng và vừa nhập ngựa liền chất liền có lại vừa nhập hóa cấp chất chơi luôn đó. Ưu tiên hôm nay là xong rồi đó. Thôi nghỉ 12 rưỡi rồi, không còn sớm rồi đâu. Mình nghĩ chúng ta nên ngủ sớm để không tốt cho sức khỏe. Tính ra nãy giờ con YouTube mất YouTube tới 12 giờ luôn mà. Tàn ác thiệt chứ. Rồi, coi YouTube tới 12 giờ luôn. Ác thiệt. Nhưng mà cái gì cài được kỹ hay còn việc con YouTube mà không chỉ trong đầu. Chúng ta những bữa theo và tư học hành chăm chỉ hơn chứ không thể nhắn đi cái đây được. Thôi kết thúc tại đây thôi. Mọi người chúc mọi người ngủ ngon. Ít ra tôi chưa ghi tiếng hello world, còn chính của TV vừa nằm siêu sát thì cũng hay vậy đó. Thôi nghỉ thôi, học liên rất là bổ ích rồi. Thực ra là gì có làm một tí rồi, vẫn đang còn lỗ quá, view A3 còn quá lỗ đi nên là chưa làm tiếp được. Khi nào sửa hết lỗi rồi mình sẽ ngồi livestream lại tiếp. Chờ đi không, để hết lỗi đã. Tạm biệt mọi người, chúc mọi người ngủ ngon. Bye bye.